Good day, everybody. Welcome again to Splints and Whiskey. My name is Liz Artz, and I am super excited about getting on this podcast today because we have such a cool guest with some awesome experience in military medicine. Today, we have on Travis Kaufman. Travis is recently retired from the United States Army as a PA, physician's assistant. And I'm going to have him introduce himself to you, but I think we're going to have an awesome conversation today as his background in serving others in our medical community with his battle buddies, even all the way to the White House. We're going to be able to talk about some of the things that Travis learned, best practices, and learn about his mission. So, Travis, I am honored to have you on Splits and Whiskey. Thank you so much for coming. And if you don't mind, please just introduce yourself to listeners, give us your background, and then, what it was, I guess, your background through the Army, and then what you're doing today. And then we're going to have a conversation just about military medicine in general. And I know all of our listeners are super psyched to hear from you. So thanks for being on.
Awesome. Hey, Liz, thanks so much for having me. And thanks to, Splints and Whiskey is really doing great things with the podcast. I've seen your episodes and just really, showcasing amazing medical professionals out there. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I was a small town kid from Missouri. I joined the U.S. Army in 2000 as actually a U.S. Army deep sea diver. Um, I joined out of just pure adventure. Thought I'd just get out there and do something fun. And
Yeah.
and about 5 weeks into a hell week in the dive school, I found myself getting half drowned underwater, and I'm like, well, I guess we're doing this. So somehow managed to get through dive school, and I was an Army deep sea diver for about 10 years. Um, I I was deployed in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then in 2005. Our team had a run-in with the improvised explosive device in 2005, and a combat medic and Army PA saved some of our guys' lives. That was kind of my first introduction, really, to Army medicine. And I had to ask that Army PA, like, "What do you do?" He's like, "I'm an Army PA," and I'm like, "I want to do what you do. You save lives. That's awesome." So, it took me a while to get the prerequisites to join PA school, but I wound up attending the Inter Service Physician Assistant Program. Did my first year at San Antonio, Texas, and then my residency at Tripler Army Medical Center. And
Mhm.
yeah, I just finished up PA school in 2012, and I got out and went to a light infantry unit there at 25th Infantry Division, and found myself deployed again. Probably the most amazing experience, though, is being a young PA to be able to deploy with those young infantry soldiers and just see how, really they're the best America has to offer. And I will say that any day, all day, and just amazing people. So
Yeah.
I worked there. We did all kinds of jungle training. We deployed, just did amazing work there. Came back from a deployment. I got a call from the division surgeon, and he's like, hey, Travis, how would you like to be a White House PA? And I was like, sir, I'm a pretty roughneck PA. I was a diver before, and I've been with the infantry. He's like, that's exactly what they want. They want people that are operational, worked outside the clinic. So I wound up putting a packet in, and I got picked to interview, and I got picked to work there as a White House PA. So I worked there from 2016 to 2021. I worked with President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden.
That's
Probably
incredible.
yes, it was an amazing experience. It's still surreal thinking back to it. Worked for presidential inaugurations. Traveled to, gosh, I think 46 or 52 countries, almost every state. Um, did that mission. It was amazing. Went through COVID. I worked there as a White House PA and a tactical medical officer, and I wound up leaving as the chief operations officer and the senior PA. So probably the most developmental time of my life as just a leader, a military officer, and a medical provider.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about hanging it up. I was at 20 years of service, and there was this new unit called advising unit that General Milley had. He had kind of said that we needed. It started back in the Vietnam days. We did it through Afghanistan, and he said we need a more permanent advising unit. So I think that would be awesome. It sounds like a really cool mission. And I got to Fort Carson, Colorado with the Force Security Force Assistance Brigade. 3 months later, I found myself deployed to Romania, which was great. The mission is really to build the capability and capacity of our partners that we work with. For Europe is NATO, and
Yeah.
also just make sure we're interoperable, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know, none of us knew, but while we were there, the Afghanistan withdrawal happened and then Ukraine was invaded. So I found myself kind of involved in that and wound up going back and deploying several times to Europe across 17 different nations. And I think we worked with around 35 different country or nations in 17 countries, really advising on best medical practices all the way from point of injury care to tactical field care to even in the hospitals. We were training Ukrainian soldiers to be combat medics. So it actually was an extraordinary way to really end my career and just make a huge difference. Just recently retired in February of 2025. My wife said, "Hey, it's time after the White House," and then deploying for the past 18 months out of 3 years. It's time. So made that
Yeah.
call. It's good though. I'm transitioning. I work with the University of Lynchburg's Doctor of Medical Science program, and I run the Emergency Management Global Health. So I get to still do global health missions across the U.S. Just got back from Mexico in January. I'm heading to Panama this month, and we're doing Tanzania in August. So still doing that, and then I'm adjunct faculty with Harvard Faculty Physicians, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, their Disaster Medicine Fellowship, doing some kind of executive medicine and disaster response work with them. And then I'm also just working part-time with the Critical Access Hospital here in Colorado, mainly to keep those trauma skills and there's really a rural healthcare here, and there's a big need, and I think it's great to give back there and do that work. So that's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm doing now, and who knows what else I'll add to it. But just got yeah, just got back from a nice Hawaii trip with the family. That was our retirement trip, just to kind of ease off the throttle a little bit, but now we're getting back after it.
Oh gosh. The White House. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience and tell us kind of what the mission's all about?
Yeah, it's really an amazing thing, and a lot of people don't really realize the military actually really runs all the logistical, medical, transportation for the president. It's the main unit is the White House Military Office, and that's the office that's in charge of all the units. So when you hear Air Force One, that's actually the Presidential Airlift Group. You got the Marines, which is HMX-1, which is like the helicopters.
Uh-huh.
You got White House Transportation Agency, which is all the limos and stuff you see around. That's all the transportation. You have the White House Mess that does all the cooking and all that stuff. And then you have your White House Communications Agency. They do all the comms. And then lastly is the White House Medical Unit. And that's all the medical care for the president, the first family, the vice president, their families, and also the cabinet. And by extension, all of the staff that work at the White House, because if you got to keep all the staff healthy to make sure that the president's healthy, right? That's really
Right.
a part of it. Yeah. So the mission of the White House Medical Unit is really just kind of three-tier, right? So the first is the continuity of government operations, right? So you're making sure that there's always a medical plan in place. So anywhere in the world the president or vice president goes, you have a medical plan. God forbid something traumatic happens, or just something like medical, like maybe a myocardial infarction or a stroke. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're all humans, so there's always that, to make sure that that's in place. Um, and then it's just taking care of the cabinet members and making sure that that's all good to go. The executive medicine piece, that's where the Walter Reed comes into play. And then lastly, it's the staff, right? Just making sure the staff is cared for, because when you're taking the staff overseas, you still got to make sure that you're doing their travel vaccines, you're making sure they got the right medications. So not only are you doing executive and protective medicine, you're ready for disaster response, but you're also doing travel medicine, for these White House staff, because like I said, if everyone has to be healthy to keep that continuity of government going. So that's the overall mission of the White House Medical Unit.
Wow. And so when the person approached you after you did your deployment and he approached you and said, "Hey, would you be interested in basically applying to be on the White House medical unit staff?" Um, did you feel overwhelmed or did you feel ready for that task? Because that you had just become a PA, right?
Yeah, I had been a PA for about almost 3 years, about 3 years. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
For about 3 years, I think. No, I felt I mean, I think we all have some imposter syndrome for sure.
Hmm.
Then they also look at the total soldier because I had already been in the military for 10 years. I had multiple deployments. So with some of that comes maturity and experience, life experiences that help. And I had been on multiple, as a PA, I had been on multiple deployments. I had kind of done some unique things with jungle operations. Just kind of a little bit more, I guess, unique for maybe PA because maybe where I was located or just the opportunities that I had. So I think, yeah, I definitely was a little nervous. Like, I don't know if honestly, I didn't know, am I polished enough? Because being with the infantry, I'm used to having knees in the dirt medicine. Like
Right.
that's probably who I am. Really, I'm a knees in the dirt, outside the clinic kind of guy,
Yeah.
PA. So I had a little bit of apprehension about that. But then when I went to interview, and I met the other PA, so the White House Medical Unit it's actually a pretty large unit. It's 17 PAs, give or take a few. It's about 9 doctors, 9 nurses, and about 9 medics, and
Wow.
it's a joint unit. So there's Army PAs, there's Navy, there's Air Force, and there's even some Coast Guard. Um, so when I met them, some were from special ops background, some were from like being out on the ship because they're
Hmm.
Navy, um, and they were all very, their PJs and doing that work. And he was kind of like, hey, I got the same story. I've been out doing the same kind of work. Another one of the female PAs, she had been out on a Coast Guard ship and was really like by herself on this ship, and that's how she got recruited. So that's kind of how they recruit you. So once I met that group of professionals, and I felt a lot more comfortable, like I belonged, and that
Yeah.
really helped a lot. Um, so that they think that's kind of how it went for me for sure.
That's really cool. I'm glad to hear that the Coast Guard is represented because our poor coasties, they don't get as much love as all the other as all the other branches, do they?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
they do a good job. They do a good job to make it a joint unit because because the mission is never just the mission is so different because the president and the vice president, they travel all over the world. You may be doing some work with the Navy, maybe doing some work with the Coast Guard. You could find yourself on the coast of California, or like myself, you could find your own mission in Papua New Guinea. So it's good to have that overall experience because let me know if I'm getting ahead, but the training path is there's a very long training path once you do get hired with the mission.
I bet.
So yeah, so that path is interesting. So whenever you first get hired, they don't just say, okay, here's your bag, go out there with the president, good luck. No, it's so there's about a year-long training path to become like a fully qualified White House tactical medical officer, PA. And
Right.
really, first, you do a lot of extensive trauma training. So you go to some really great trauma training that the military offers, like tactical combat medical care. Obviously, everyone's tactical combat casualty care qualified. We do some work with the Mayo Clinic. Um, we did some work with Harvard, and then some of the other, the special operations side of the house, just to make sure like your trauma skills are top notch.
Hmm.
But within that, the PAs actually become the main medical planners. So you actually do a lot of medical planning and logistics operations to become that main planner, which was kind of new. I had done medical planning going overseas, but I always had an Army planner with me. So becoming the sole planner, it was a little bit of a learning curve, but that's why it is such a joint force, right? So when you are going to these other areas, you can understand like a level 1, level 2 trauma center.
Right.
If you're working with naval ships, you know the qualifications of what's on that naval ship, right? Obviously, the president has his helicopters and Air Force One, but you also need to know the other entities of the helicopters and ambulances you're working with. So you go through this training path to really learn about all of that, so you can make the most sound plan that keep the president and vice president safe.
That's incredible. When you are doing the plans, is it based on, obviously, I guess you'd have to have a baseline of those you protect or those that you serve. So you'd have to have a health baseline, I'm sure, of each president in office. So of course you know their baseline. So if you had to tweak your plan, if let's say it's one of the presidents is extremely hypertensive or something of that nature, that would go into your planning, I'm sure, the individual. But what other things go into your planning? Is it mainly where they're going to travel to, and then how you make sure that each person is, or that every step of the way they're accounted for on a medical way? I mean, how do you know what to plan?
Yeah, it's that's a great question, right? So and it's so when you when you make the plan, you plan for everything. And you're not just making the plan in a silo, and that's also the reason why PAs are the main planners. So the beauty of a PA is not only can you teach the PA to be the planner, but also whenever we are going overseas and say a staff person or a military person gets sick, we can also treat them on the road. And that's
Yeah.
actually one of the reasons why they hire a lot of the operational PAs, because you've worked outside the clinic. So if someone, gets an injury and you have to do some sutures, maybe because there's some countries like I say, Papua New Guinea was an example where the healthcare systems are just not quite the same as America. So
Hmm.
you want to make sure that you have some capabilities in addition to what they would have locally, and that's where the medical plan comes into play. When I say you don't work in a silo, you're working with the White House military office. So you always got the military aide to the president. The military aide to the president is kind of like the person in charge of everything. They're the responsible person of everything on the ground to make sure the
Wow.
comms are going well and make sure that they're like in charge. And then you got Secret Service. So Secret Service, they're in charge of all the protection. So all the
Hmm.
security and the protection. So you have to develop your medical plan to meet all those needs as well. Because you could have this beautiful medical plan, but if it doesn't meet the comms parameters and it's a crappy security plan, then it's not going to be good for everybody. So you plan it together. So usually that's first thing is you obviously you're going to do a recon before you even leave to look at the local hospitals and figure out what local hospitals are going to be good. You make point of contacts with them, and you actually do an on-site survey with the hospitals just to kind of develop a plan and verify
Wow.
what's going on there. Yeah, so and that's probably the number one part of the plan is just to verify what assets you have on the ground. Um,
Hmm.
and a really great example, you could look in the past. You can remember when President Reagan was shot.
Hmm.
President Reagan was shot, and he kind of got shuffled into the limo really fast, and they took him to GW Hospital. But he actually almost bled out on the way there and almost passed away. So that's kind of where White House Medical Unit, I would say, was really, really came into play because it's like, that transition from, the point of injury to getting to the hospital is very important, as we know in combat medicine, right? I
Hmm.
mean, just think in the beginning of OIF1 when we weren't putting tourniquets on anybody and they were passing away, or we learned about tourniquets, but then we weren't worried about hypothermia in the helicopters and they were dying en route.
Right.
So that's really the critical part of the plan that we're thinking about is that transition from point of injury. And when I say injury, could be trauma, could be MI, could be stroke, could be a
Right.
that's all the things we think about in that medical plan. So um, so that's how that plan goes. So we look at the local hospitals, and then we look at our evacuation plan platforms, just to make sure that we have the right evacuation platforms that's going to meet it. Because you just think if you hop in, when we think about casualty evacuation versus medical evacuation platforms,
Yeah.
if we just hop into any car or an armored limo, that's still a casualty evacuation. It's not a medical platform. So we have to plan for that, make sure that's good to go. Um, and then also the assets on the ground, because another thing that we don't train a lot in the military as much as we used to, but chemical biological warfare, something that we probably we think about all this other stuff, but chemical a biological weapon can be used against the president. So we also plan for that as well. So it's
Yeah.
when I say everything, it's you're worried about all that medical stuff, but then the chemical, biological, all that stuff to make sure that you got all your you plan for all the contingencies to make sure that if there's an injury that happens, you can treat on site, but also meet the security plan, and
Hmm.
then you can get your comms to call the hospital or the evac platform so we can get moving, get into the evac platform, But then when you think about transitions, right? So transitions are always, and stop me if I'm going too much, but
This is great.
transitions transitions are some of the most deadly times in the evacuation um, line, right? So think about going, from the point of injury into like a limo or like an ambulance, and then going from ambulance to the helicopter and the helicopter to the hospital. All those
Hmm.
times, if you got an airway, if you got an IV or an IO, you got a tourniquet, and you also got the hustle and bustle because it's the president of the United States. Those are all times when any casualty you're treating can die because maybe you forget to recheck, or you're in this casualty evacuation platform and you got people that are also guarding you with weapons and you're trying to do medical. Transitions are the most dangerous. So those are things that we always have to plan for. So always making a plan. Is it really that smart to go to the helicopter, or is it better to drive? And those are all things
Right.
sometimes everybody loves the sexy helicopter, and maybe it cuts off 2 minutes,
Eh,
but but they also don't think about the 5 minutes it took you to transition and all that. So sometimes, those are the decisions that have to come into play, and that's the PA as the main tactical medical plan on the ground have to help make that decisions, but obviously you're not in a silo. So that's the important of the training, is to make those decisions, because you're not going to make the decision under like low stress. It's going to be a very high stress environment. The eyes of the world are going to be on you,
yeah.
and it's got to be the right plan, So and also contingencies. You can't just have one primary plan and be like, that's it. It has to
Right.
change. Um, just thinking about the different missions. Gosh, I mean, like I said, I mentioned Papua New Guinea. We're in Vietnam. These are some pretty remote areas that we were in, right? And then also when you're making these medical plans, you're building trust with these other countries to help, take care of the leader of the free world. Also, making sure that our communication's the same. So these are all things you have to take into account when you're on these missions. So long answer for your question, but yeah, the medical, you just thinking about all, and it goes back to that operational mindset, why they hire guys and girls, men and women from the operational, because that's how our brains think, because we've been to those
Right.
combat zones, we've been in the jungle, we've been on the ships, and you've done it already with soldiers and sailors and airmen. So you can already think that way with the president. Not knocking anybody that's only been in the hospital, but your mind doesn't always think that way.
It's amazing that you had the opportunity to see three different administrations. Um, did your skill set, or not your skill set, but did your plan at all change depending on who was in office?
Oh, no, not really. The plan pretty much always stayed the same. Now, obviously, with different administrations, you're working with different staff,
Mm.
which is fine. And that's the thing too. The beauty of the White House Military Office and the White House Medical Unit, it's apolitical. And so all the staffers and the presidents, they love the military. They treat us well. So and we're the subject matter experts. And like, so when a president changes, like, we don't change, like, their administration changes, we stay the same. So they
Mm,
really trust our plans, which is really probably one of the awesomest, really the best things about the job that I love. But you do adjust a little bit to staff, sometimes that adjusts, but the presidents they get the same plans. Obviously the executive medicine changes a little bit because they're just different needs. Obviously if it's like we had a female vice president, just different executive care that you would want to think about. But
yeah.
the medical plan overall stays the same for sure. Now, those inaugurations, you think about. So I was part of two inaugurations, from President
Hmm.
Obama to President Trump, where I was actually the main planner for the inauguration, and then I was the chief operations officer for this inauguration from President Trump to Biden. And those are some of the probably the most high risk when you think about it, because you're bringing all these world leaders together in
Yeah.
one spot. So those are some of the medical plans. And then DC is a very secure area, but really making sure you have a medical plan for every world leader and where they're going to go, and the platform and the comms and Secret
Yeah.
Service. Those are probably one of the the best missions I got to do, but also probably one of the most complicated that really helped me grow as a leader and collaborate with other entities.
If you were there at that White House through 2020, what was that like? I mean, that had to be
Yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah.
What was that like?
COVID probably changed. I mean, it changed the world, and it even changed our mission quite a bit. Where as medical, we are always kind of the background. We got these great medical plans. It's really been, I mean, the president, no president's really been injured. So we got our medical plan, but no one's really been injured since really Reagan.
Yeah.
Um, so it kind of, we became kind of the tip of the spear. So it was very interesting because, we had to collaborate with many different agencies. We were working with Health and Human Services. We were working with CDC. And really, if the White House is the first to do it, everybody follows. So we really had to kind of sit down in the beginning and be like, okay, what are we going to do that's going to be smart, but also protect the president of the United States? Because that's what's really going to be important, right?
Hmm.
And there was a little bit of debate in the beginning about wearing masks. Are we going to wear masks? It could, because in the beginning, if you see people, everyone at the White House wearing masks, it could cause a lot of worldwide kind of, everybody can kind of get a little bit of panic.
Yeah, it could be like
So
a yeah, hysteria. Honestly,
yeah,
yeah, because they feel safe there. Wow, yeah.
that was really a big debate we had to have, and then we were doing thermometer checks in the beginning, and it was really, hindsight could be like, oh, none of that was necessary, but at the time we didn't know because it's
Hmm.
brand new science. It's interesting too because that January we had just traveled to India for a presidential trip, and that's when everything was starting to pop up, and we were starting to see some of the illness, and we were kind of like, this seems like a really bad cold that people are getting.
Hmm.
So yeah, there was a lot of that, but there was also just like, okay, what are the protocols going to be to protect the president and the vice president, right? So we
Hmm.
had to, look at some different things, setting up different ways of testing people before they can meet the president, but also being courteous and respectful to let people know. I mean, at the time, it was new to everybody. They were pretty patient with us and met our protocols pretty well. Because obviously, if you're going to protect the president, you don't want to be the one to give the president COVID. You know.
Right, right.
Yeah,
That
you know what
would
I'm
not
saying?
look good.
Yeah. So it just took a lot of just careful debate and bringing in all the shareholders to make sure we were making the right decision at the time, and then doing our best to communicate to not just the White House staff but also the president, like this is what we're going to do, but also get buy-in as well.
Right.
Yeah, and during COVID, I would say maybe across America we didn't quite get the buy-in as well as we probably should have, as far as just messaging from all the leaders. So that was a challenge, but I think we did the best we could do with the circumstances. But I mean, it really changed. So anytime we would go on Air Force One, we would test every person that would go on Air Force One before we'd fly.
Right.
So you can imagine the backwards planning and the logistics. If we're going to have a 6 a.m. flight, you can imagine some of the
Yeah.
people that maybe weren't super happy with us, but we had to do it. That was our mission, is
Right.
protection, overall protection. United the presidents are number one. So that the logistics and tracking of that probably, like I said, as a leader and as a communicator, that's probably where I grew the most, because I did have to communicate with people to get them to do things they didn't necessarily want to do or agree with at the time, but convince them like this is to protect the president and the families. This is what we should do. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
a definitely was an interesting time, but we got through it, and we protected the president, and then obviously when we did the transition, we just had to kind of meet the parameters.
Hi.
Just
I
kind
see you
of
again.
difficult. But it's always really, it's just bringing those shareholders together. But that was one of my jobs as the chief operations officers. I had to actually write the COVID protocol for the White House across multiple agencies, from the Secret Service all the way to Air Force One, to helicopters, the helicopter squadron, to communications agency. So yeah, bringing that together, and then obviously looking over it and making sure that it was correct and most up to date was like a daily thing. I mean, even CDC, we would check CDC because, sometimes it would change by the day,
Oh,
you know.
yes.
And then, of course, when we got the vaccines, making sure we got all of our staff vaccinated appropriately. So, and with all that comes the logistics planning. It's just like a COVID lab to test. You can't just set that overnight. Just like because we did everything in house, which is important, right? Because if you can do everything in house, you're meeting that mission of protecting the president, the continuity of government, and the staff. So
Right.
obviously, the logistics of doing all that was we had to just bring in different just the multi stakeholders to make sure we were all in agreement on the right plan.
Wow, that's incredible. And I think about it for all that time that we are all going, what's the White House going to say? And poor Travis is back there. You kept all of us safe, Travis. It was not just the president. Thank you. Because we all followed what the White House was doing. I mean, it was just that is really, really cool. I don't know if you could truck up any, I don't have any job that people could say, like, I've had this much experience in doing this. I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. Um, I think about the time when the president did get COVID. What happened there? Like, what was how did you guys respond to that when he had to be deployed to Walter Reed and then come back and stuff? What was that like?
I mean, and just like all of our medical plans, that's all written into our plan already. So we just stuck with our written plan that we already had, and that's really what we did. There's nothing. That's the beauty of the White House Medical Unit and having all these medical plans is we just stick with them and make sure that we're sticking with those. And obviously, Walter Reed is our partner that we work with all the time. So that's
Yeah,
really what we do there. Yeah.
that's just super interesting. During the time of 2020, a lot of stuff happened in that brought a lot of unrest to the country. I know in the beginning of 2020, we all sheltered in place, and I think everybody thought it was going to be like spring break, that we were going to be off for 2 weeks and then go back to school or something.
Yeah.
And we didn't realize it was going to change our world as we knew it, really, at that time. Um, so I look back at that year and all the different hurdles you must have run into. In May of 2020. That was when we started having some civil unrest within
Yeah.
the United States and within these walls. And the pandemic was still going on, but people had been home for 2.5 months. They were starting to get agitated and crazy. What was it like during the time? Um, I'm sure you guys had to plan and prepare for some of the unrest that was happening across all of our big cities, based on really what happened to George Floyd at Memorial Day of 2020 or 2021. No, 2020 it was. Yeah.
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 Yeah. That year was probably, if we go back and look at it, I go back and look at it. I'm like, how in the heck did we do that year? So not only do we have, so 2020 was we had COVID, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we had, the protests going on in America, civil unrest. We also had, I think, one of the worst wildfire years in California that year. And then we
Yeah.
also had one of the worst hurricane seasons as well. So it was kind of an interesting time to look at, and that's when I was at the height. I was the senior PA, and I was the chief operations officer, and I look about it. And honestly, I'm like, how did I survive that year? But
I mean, I am thinking that right now. I mean, I don't know how you don't have PTSD just from that year. Because that's incredible. There was so much going on during that time.
it was we really just we and that's the beauty of that team, and I want to have to say that medical team is still very special to me, and I think we probably had some bonding because of COVID. And
Mhm.
that job already makes you bond because you are traveling a lot, and that becomes your family.
Right.
um, because you are, I mean, usually you'd be on the road anywhere from 250 to 280 days a year making those medical
Wow.
plans. So, and that was my job as the senior PA, and the chief operations officer, just to kind of do that check on everybody, like, hey, how are you doing? How's your family? And that's what we
Hmm.
had to do a lot that year. Um, we had a time when there were some protests outside of the White House where we did have to have some medical coverage for our Secret Service agents that were protecting the White House, which were kind of a little bit different for us. Something we had a plan for it, but it was very new, so it was a little bit stressful for the team. So we always had to just check in and just make sure we had those in-house medical plans and they were correct, right?
Yeah.
If you have to, obviously, when you're evacuating the president, that's easy. But if you have to evacuate someone else, the plan becomes a little different, and how you're going to make it happen and keep everybody safe. And then kind of fast forward to the wildfires in California. I'll never forget the PI I had deployed there. She was having a hard time because the smoke was so bad, and really trying to determine if this is the right medical plan that the president should actually visit. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, we're going back to safety, and it's like, should we have the president visit here? Because it's not that safe right now. So
Yeah.
those are times we had to kind of make some of those decisions and really give feedback back, like maybe push the trip back a week or consider this instead. And we were also still doing COVID, at that
I
time as
know.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then and then we had the hurricanes that we were dealing with as well. And then on top of all that, at the end of 2020, we had the elections, a president a presidential election. None of us really kind
Yeah.
of remember it, but we were also having a presidential election, which for the White House medical unit, anytime it's election season, it's kind of like a Super Bowl for us because presidents are traveling to 5 states in one day. Well, if you think of
Right.
so 5 states in one day, you have to have a PA in each state making a medical plan. So that's 5 of your PAs that are out there making a medical plan, and we're dealing with COVID testing, and we're in the middle of COVID vaccines. And so, yeah, it was just a lot of different logistical things. So really the big thing for us was checking in on our teammates, making
Yeah.
sure everyone was okay, and also just looking at our medical plan and making sure we're making those sound decisions, obviously to protect the president and vice president. Um, so yeah, it was just kind of that's why I say I think that time really grew me as a leader because I had to really just focus on the mission, but also, the people working with me and beside me to make sure that we were making the most appropriate decisions while dealing with, I hate to say it, but like, you think of risk and uncertainty, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
always we can always kind of measure risk. We have all these tools to measure risk. We can do SWOT analysis, but really COVID, the protests that were going on, the wildfires, that's all uncertainty. That's there's not there's all uncertainty. So you sometimes have to make decisions in uncertain times with the trust of your teammates, but also be able to adjust on the fly if you need to. And that's
Yeah.
probably where I used a lot of that, like transformational, at times transactional, and then servant leadership to really kind of. I almost had to use all those different styles, and also the different missions because some of the missions that we had to go make plans, especially the areas where there was major protests that the president was visiting, it was sensitive, so I had
Mm-hmm.
to actually talk with that PA and that medical planner, like, are you comfortable with doing this mission? Because I know that there's some political sensitivities, there's maybe some personal sensitivities,
Right.
um, so just very important to address all of that to make sure that we were, not only taking care of our teammates but meeting the mission.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I couldn't even imagine it when we think that when you're saying that the medical unit and the whole team is 17 PAs, 9 doctors. I think it says 9 medics. I don't even know if I wrote that correctly, but you're with how big your team is, it still becomes very thin when people are all over the country. I mean, that to me is then it starts to seem like, wow, it's small. Is there somebody always traveling with the president as well from
Well,
that
that's the
team?
and that's yeah, it seems like a big team, but really, so if you think about when the president would go overseas and say that they're going to go on like a 5 overseas trip, like across Asia. So one of the trips he did Da Nang, he did Hanoi. I think he stopped in Japan. I think Australia on the way. Well, you try to send 2 PAs on each of those missions to make a plan, because when you're overseas, there's a lot going on with not just planning, but the staff to take care of them. So
Hmm.
you think if you got 5 overseas trips, that's 10 of your PAs that are out.
Right.
We got the clinic at the White House we're still manning, and then also just the day to day in town, and also maybe president's going to go visit Texas and Missouri. That's two
Yeah.
more PAs. So when you're looking at your team, there would be times when I was working in the clinic, but also doing operation stuff because you just got to meet the mission. So there is times when you just have to be very operationally minded and organized. Organized.
So organized. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
and so organized, and you have to be about 15 steps. You have to be, as the COO of of what you were doing, you have to be so many steps ahead of even your team, much
yeah,
less, much less the world. I mean,
yeah.
that's just, it's crazy. And then when you, for those who are at the White House, the actual clinic inside of the White House, then
Mhm.
is that just serving? I know it serves staff, you said, and then it would serve. I mean, I guess how many patients do you think that White
Yeah,
House clinic
it's
serves?
it's interesting. So there's two clinics actually at the White House. So the Eisenhower Executive Office building, the really old, beautiful building right next to the White House. So that's the main clinic, and that's where staff can come in and get medical care, and we just check on them. We take care of all the military people. It's just like a regular, acute care. Some family practice. You can do some emergencies there too, because even when there's White House tours. If they get hurt on a White House tour, maybe say someone's having an asthma attack, we respond to take care of them.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
and then the president in the residence clinic, so in the White House proper, there's a clinic that's manned 24 hours a day, and that's
Wow.
for the president and the family only.
Wow.
So those clinics are always have a PA or a doc in them at all times. So yeah, when you're manning those clinics, yeah, you have to think about those as well, which is very interesting. The selection process to work at the White House, the I, the people that work there are probably the most amazing people I've ever worked with in my military career.
Wow.
Just selfless service, very professional, and you also come to understand, like, I'm a military person working at the White House. It's really an honor and a privilege. So you really you put everything you got into it, and that's what's amazing. No one's really ever having a bad day. Like
Yeah.
everyone's there to perform and get after it, which is amazing too. That's what I love about it, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think I would love that too. I mean, I think that sometimes, outsiders, like if you're not in that North Capital region and you're not around, our nation's heroes. I mean, our heroes are everywhere, but when sometimes sometimes I think we as lay people forget um just how awestruck you would be on a just for whenever I go up there, if I drive by the White House, I'm just completely in awe, like reverence to the Capitol, and to all of these great areas and institutions that that we see as Americans. And I think a lot of us have kind of forgotten about how much power, if you're truly a patriot, how much power comes with being able to that it almost empowers you, that you are really serving your country big time, in the highest of ways. I mean, that is super cool. Have you had any, were there any emergencies that you're medical emergencies that you could speak to that without giving or
I don't really have any good medical emergency stories I could probably talk about. I do have some. I have a fun story I could tell you about.
okay.
Um, this one just always goes back to I talked to you about, like, when the presidents change, they love the military, and they have their full trust in us, which is awesome. I'll never forget. I was in the residence clinic on the night shift, and the military aide to the president, he said, "Hey, the president wants all the military members on duty to come to the White House Theater at 2000 8 p.m." And I was like, "Okay." So I called my director, and I'm like, "Hey, sir, am I allowed to go to the White House Theater?" And he's like, "If the president tells you to be at the White House Theater, just go, just take your medical bag." And I'm like, "Okay." So I get to the White House Theater, and here's President Trump and his whole family. and he's got all the cabinet. He's like, look at you all. You know how he talks. He's like, look at you all. You're so beautiful. You're so young. You're so beautiful. He's like, get some snacks. And we actually sat down and watched Dunkirk, the movie, with him in the White House Theater. And that was his first 2 weeks of being a president. But I could tell you stories like that with all the presidents. They treated the military so well, and they always took care of us because they knew that we really worked hard for them. So they always paid it forward. I just remember that. It's a funny story. I just thought about talking. I was on a 24-hour night duty, and it
Yeah.
brings us there, and we're just hanging out with the president's family in the cabinet, just watching the movie. So that, with all that hard work, also comes really amazing experiences that will stick with me forever.
Oh, I bet.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, so sometimes I'm sort of speechless when I think about all these different things that all the different opportunities that you have, and I guess it was very normal. Was it normal to be able to hold on a conversation, dialogue when you were there with senior staff and you had to, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're their mouth. Yeah. Wow.
And that comes back to, like everyone that, the operational minded folks that get hired there, everyone's pretty confident, but your first couple of times, if you're talking to the president or you're talking to a senior staff, you get your butterflies in the stomach and you're a little nervous, but especially when it comes to the medical plan, you got to put that away and just come professional, because you put in the work and you put in the plan. So just, there's a thing in the military says, be bold, be brilliant, be gone. You've probably heard that before.
I have, yeah, and I love it.
Yeah, you come with your plan, you show it, you be smart, and you be gone. Don't over talk. Now, of course, when it comes to medicine, any of the staff that would come see us, no one comes to medical because they feel good,
Right. Yeah.
So that's where it goes back to humanity. It could be the most important person, that you've ever met, or the richest person in the world, or a congressperson, but when they're sick, they're all human beings, and
Yeah.
they're coming to you because they trust you as because everyone calls you doc, and doc to
Right.
me is a medic, it's a PA, it could be a nurse, it could be a doc. In the military, doc is a very trusted person, and you earn that by giving the best care, and you just see this fellow human being. I remember when people would get COVID, they would be pretty freaked out in the beginning. And
Mhm.
it was my job to not just take care of them, but reassure them and give them that humanity that they could say, yeah, thanks so much, doc. I really appreciate that, because that's what it's all about. So I think for me, that's something how I've always thought about it. It's another human being in front of me, and I'm going to give them all I got and just take care of them. Because that's why I became a PA. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's so true. We talk about when you're right in there one-on-one with the patient, then they are human. Nothing else matters. I mean, they're human, and you're able to you play a lot of roles. You're not only their medical caretaker, and you're also assessing you're interviewing them. You're trying to figure out exactly what's wrong, but then you're also trying to calm their nerves. I couldn't imagine how COVID must have scared people early on, before we really knew, what was happening with it. I couldn't imagine if someone came in and did everybody on staff have to spend the night and stay there? Because did you have to quarantine there for the 2 weeks, or were you able to leave and come back? And
No, you pretty much left and came back, and we just did kind of like a daily testing regimen.
mm-hmm.
Obviously medical staff, we would test every day to make sure that we're safe, and then we would test the general public. And then you're smart about, if they're going to meet the president, then you kind of narrow it down, and also being mindful of supplies and what you have. So, but no one, if someone was positive, they would go home and quarantine. Um,
Right, stuff like that. And I wondered, or do you pick up some best practices? Have you picked up any from other countries that you go, oh, we should implement that? Or is ours really the best?
So, I mean, yeah, I think there's ideas that you definitely get, especially so for one thing that I kind of feel like is something I kind of specialize in, or I maybe I just have an interest in, is like medical platforms and your medical bags, right? Because obviously you got to be able to work out of the bag that you're carrying on your back, and then the platform that you get into. So yeah, there was a lot of, so especially when you work in Asia, Asia's very you see a lot of especially in their ERs, they're very, when you think of Lean Six Sigma, like they're very lean and very it's very well organized on how they set things up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I was in Israel and Jerusalem, seeing the way they, their evacuation platforms set up everywhere from motorcycles to ambulances. There's always ideas that you could take from them, and maybe you make a small tweak to what you're doing already. Like, oh, I like how they set that up inside the ambulance. I'm going to take that back, and we'll do a working group to see if that's an improvement we need to make in our ambulance. Or, obviously, when my time at the White House, we made the change from King LTs to iGels, and
Ah,
and that was a change that we had to kind of train across the board to make sure we were the most up to date. And now over time, we're looking, um, you also look at different products that you're carrying with you that are going to make the most sense. And look how we've evolved even in these combat years, and even now with Ukraine. It was mass transfusion protocol, but you can't really do that with the combat medic on the ground. So then we
mm-hmm.
got the freeze dried plasma, and that's still fairly newish, and the FDA approval, and then now all the way to whole blood. So those are all practices that you see that you adopt along the way. I wouldn't necessarily say so much at the White House with the products, but I've seen in my practice along the way, training the nations that I've trained overseas, especially in NATO, because I love NATO, but NATO has a tendency to adopt things kind of maybe slow at times.
Right.
But when you see a conflict like Ukraine, you kind of have to adopt fast because they've adopted so fast. So
Mm-hmm.
I can remember when I trained the first Ukrainian soldier. We're talking about, because also it's the supplies they have. They're still using Hexten in the beginning,
Right.
which, and now we're all the way to whole blood if the capability can be there, and everything in between. So I think that's important to see what other nations are doing to help us adapt to that. It kind of goes back to freeze dried plasma. I think we kind of picked that up from another nation.
Yeah.
So that's what I would see. Just different. I mean, I've walked and surveyed probably 2,000 hospitals, maybe more. I'm not even sure, across the world, and you
Yeah,
see
that's cool.
amazing things. I mean, I saw one of the most amazing setups. I think it was a Navajo Nation actually, where because they had to treat all the COVID patients in the hospital, so they set up a trauma tent outside, and it looked like a Roll One aid station, but but civilian style, and it was amazing. And I was like, holy
That
cow!
is,
Like, gave me a lot of ideas on things, like because they had to adapt.
yeah.
Um, and when you think about your evacuation platforms, and you've probably heard this before, you're working in the back of a helicopter, you're working in the back of an ambulance. If you're working out of a backpack, it quickly becomes a yard sale in the back of that platform because you're taking stuff out and you're putting on tourniquets and you're pressed. You got your and things are on the floor, and it's, yeah. Then it turns into this huge yard sale. So
Yeah.
adopting panels on the walls, organized. So but you can't just do that. You have to train too. So you
Right.
train, and that's where that muscle memory, that training to have these panels, so to work out of it. Because if you put say the president of the United States in the back of an ambulance with, let's say, a PA, a doc, and a nurse, it gets crowded pretty fast.
I bet. Yeah.
So if you're not trained to work out your equipment, it can become complicated. So yeah, anytime I travel overseas, I always see what other platforms, especially modular,
Hmm.
to make sure that we were most up to date. And that's, we would always do sustainment training throughout. Even I was there 5 years. I would go to sustainment training usually probably once every 3 months. We always train in house, but at an outside entity, just to keep
Hmm.
those skills fresh. And it would be at major trauma centers. It would be with obviously the different soft units to make sure that we're doing it, just to make sure we're good to go. So I think
Yeah.
that was really important. But not
I'm
just
glad
really.
you said that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Travis, but I'm
Yeah,
glad you said that about the training because I was going there and then I like bit my tongue because I thought, Liz, don't ask that question if they didn't train on the daily basis. I didn't want to put you in the spot if you didn't train while you were I didn't want to make you look bad if you didn't train while you were in the White House, but I was wondering that. I was wondering how do they continue to train? Because that's
yeah.
what this show is all about. Like this show, we are people getting together and going, okay, what needs to be in my CLS bag? Like what needs to be there? What's mandatory? What's best practice? What's standard? And then what resources can I borrow from? But then they're continuing every single day to train.
Hmm.
And I wondered, did you guys still do that? I think a lot of people don't see it as a mission where you are a medical unit, you're United States Army physician's assistant. So you're practicing each day. It's your mission. And you do have to practice all the time, I'm sure, and train.
Yeah. No, we always had to set up, even though that the mission was crazy, busy, you had to set up training times, and it may be, this group of people are going to train on this together. Once a week we'd always have some lecture training and some hands-on. So
That's
it was
great.
always it was always set up, and then of course even in the clinics we had, like a whole crash cart, all that set up. So you would usually, when your clinic time was set up, you go back and run like a code or something. Like every for clinic, you would run something on yourself, or have someone run a code on you. That way you're just up to par. And then also, of course, if you had to respond to a White House tour, you probably work out of the bag, because it also reminds you, like you're in suits, so you're working in a suit.
Hmm.
When you're working in different, like that, and then also in public, if you respond to somebody, say on those White House tours, you got everybody looking at you. So
Right.
you train under that stress to make sure you know, you can adapt to it for sure. And then of course, any big major events, you just come together, and you kind of focus the training on what you're going to get after. Like I know this is what we're going to be doing on, say we're going to be going overseas. We want to train on this to make sure we're good to go. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. It does. And then
Yeah.
now, in the beginning of your when I asked you what you were doing now and what you were doing, tell me a bit about your career, but past up until retirement, and then what are you doing now? Now you are, I know you've always continued to keep teaching and instructing inside of your portfolio, but now you're continuing that, but probably you're going to spread even. This is just the beginning. It's been what has it been a couple
Yeah.
months, right? So you're probably going to be everywhere. Um, how has all that time gotten you prepared to really go back and to be in the instructor role and teach students?
Yeah, for me, is a lot of times when I teach, it's also a little bit about storytelling, right? So I always give them a little bit of why. So I was like, I was on this mission and I had to do this, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then I relate it to the training to make sure they know that it's important,
Yeah.
and I love it too. So the missions I'm doing are very broad right now. Some of them are going to be global health mission trips where we're treating underserved populations. When we were in Dominican Republic last year, there was a gentleman that was fighting with another gentleman, and he shot himself in the leg, and it went in his quad, went out his calf, and we treated him in like a pop-up clinic in a village.
Wow.
So I got to take that time, and I had first year PA students with me, to train them on like how to take care of it. They've never done that. So, and I try to relate it, and to give them the reason why they're doing it. And then, of course, in these populations, you're dealing with everything from, HIV and tuberculosis all the way to delivering babies, which is
Hmm.
it's probably a little different than like the trauma world, but it's still an important area to serve. Um, and I love taking these medical providers on these trips, because some of them have maybe only worked in the clinic, because it's not all military, right? And this is their
Right.
first time working outside the clinic and seeing what that's like. But we still, before we go on these trips, we make a very diligent medical plan and travel plan. So we also get the planning part in there as well. So
Yeah.
I like to just use it to kind of pass on that knowledge. I think it's fun, and we're also giving back. I'm hoping we can do some stuff locally here in America too. Um, but
Yes,
yeah,
I think the biggest change may be, or biggest stuff coming forward that we're dealing with.
yeah, no, that's I think we are definitely in a a changing point, because we've always focused on counterinsurgency, and now we're in the large scale combat operations. Coin the list go. That's the key buzzwords. And just
Hmm.
training over in Europe, I ran a major disaster military exercise last year in May, and we were really trying to make that pivot. And we had 35 nations there, so it was a little mix of coin and Lisco, um, making that pivot to make sure that we can really look at prolonged field care for one thing, and
Hmm.
it's going to be morphed in different ways. So just training with the Ukrainians and speaking with them, some of them are not, well, pretty much all the medics are being targeted by drones, and they have
Right.
very
Yeah.
very limited time to take care of that patient, and care under fire. So it may just be a quick, maybe just dragging them out, getting into a foxhole, which we haven't done foxhole medicine really in years,
Yeah.
getting the bleeding stopped, and then evacuating them to like a hallway of a building. Instead of having like aid stations, they're having these kind of transition points where it could be a hallway of a house, it could be a garage, it could be, until they can usually get them underground on a train to evacuate them. That's how they're getting
Yeah.
most of them evacuated. So learning how to kind of operate in that environment, so we're not thinking linear, like, care under fire, tactical field care, tactical evacuation care. It could be kind of a mix of all those, where you could be
Hmm.
doing some tactical field care, evacuation care, but then you get attacked again. I think that's how we have to kind of think a little bit. And then also, and this is one that a lot of people don't love, is triage. We have to do honest triage, because even when I was deployed overseas, I could get a patient out usually within the hour in a helicopter, and they would survive. But triage is going to become very important, because you're going to have a limited amount of supplies,
Right.
and we all love the walking blood program. It sounds super sexy, and it is. It's great, but you have to make a decision if you're going to take blood from that warfighter and then send them back out to fight. Now they're low, so is that the right decision to make? You know,
Right.
so, if you got a lot of support personnel, obviously probably use them first. But so all those decision points are things that we have to train our combat medics to think about, and then our PAs, because PAs and combat medics really are the front line of military medicine.
Yeah.
So just getting them to think that way, and then adapting technology, but don't forget about the basics.
Yes.
We're
Oh my gosh. You were preaching the gospel. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. We always got to know those basics for sure, right? And then muscle memory, like tourniquets, combat gauze, needle decompression, all that should become, and then your bag, that should become very muscle memory. Like, do it in the dark, do it in the wet, do it in the dirt, do it in the
Hmm.
wherever. Got that. But then if we can add the technology and make it work when it's there, ultrasound capabilities.
Right.
Um, I think being able to, maybe evacuating by drones, that could be the future.
Yeah.
I think that's close. I think adapting to technology, and then in our aid stations too, I think that's important as well. Don't say, oh, in an austere environment we don't need technology. There's ways we can use it, but also having the basics too are important for sure. And that comes with realistic training, no simulations. I don't know if you've seen, the medics are taping the MPA on the face, and then we got to get away.
No.
It's, well, a lot of times you simulate, so you tape it on the face, and then
Yeah.
medics get that muscle memory like that's normal, but it's not. So being careful with those, those are training scars that can stay with us. You
That
know,
you bring up such an awesome point. So I travel all around the country, and my day job is selling medical gear, training gear to. So it could be to an MTF, like a large scale, great posh MTF, or it could be to just our combat medics in the field or special operations guys or whoever. And so it varies, like your story there. I mean, like yours, like what you've seen. Sometimes I'm, I'll go to these certain large MTFs, and man, they will tell me every single thing that this mannequin can do for them, this expensive mannequin that I probably sold them 5 years ago, right? So they're telling me, this speaks Farsi. It can do this, and it can do all these. It has AI. It can talk back to you. All of these things, right? And these things are awesome. But as we've uncovered what we're learning in Ukraine, and I know it's been a couple of years now, but the reports that come back of Ukraine and then the reports that come back from Israel, and what was happening in the Gaza Strip and things like that, I have really noticed that, and I love seeing it, that we're starting to back away from the overkill of so many of these high fidelity everything, so that we can get back into really treating the patient one-on-one.
Yeah.
The medic that we talked to in Georgia, he said one of the biggest things that he was treating on Ukrainian soldiers was bacterial infection.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not something I would have thought of.
It's the problem it's the frame of thought is, well, if I can give them this antibiotic, I might as well give them double, and it's causing
Hmm.
severe infections as they get more back in the rear. Because once again, they may be just a tourniquet on the leg because they're shot in the leg, and that goes back to also tourniquet conversion too.
Yeah,
Are we looking to make sure they need that tourniquet, or can it just be a pressure dressing? But then also they use too many antibiotics and they've sat on this patient for 5 days. They stop the bleeding, but the leg's so infected they're still going to lose it.
right.
So yeah, these are all things we have to talk to our medics about, because it's going to become a reality, for sure. And yeah, I think, yeah, all the gee whiz technology is great, but yeah, you can do a lot with just basic stuff to make sure that you're
Hmm.
getting the good training, and it's also just doing it. One thing is, if when you pull up a vial of TXA, because if you're training, you're like, oh, I'm pushing TXA, I'm pushing 2 grams of TXA, but you don't actually pull it. When
Right.
people pull a vial of TXA, it's a lot. It's a lot of liquid. It's,
Uh-huh.
and that's something I always make my medics do when we were training, is actually pull it and give it, even if it's just normal saline in a bottle, to see. It's a lot. It takes time and that muscle memory. Like, it's not just instantaneous. I say I'm going to do it. Like, was your patient screaming right there? You got a tourniquet on them, and you're over here shaking and trying to pull, and you can do that with
Right.
just a person. You don't have to have a mannequin. But those are the things that are going to matter when it comes down to it. You know what I mean? If you train with that, if you have maybe pre-pulled and pre-positioned, some ketamine in a vial. When we would deploy, I would have my medics have vials of 30 milligrams of ketamine all ready to go, so
Hmm.
they weren't doing that when they got their knees on the dirt, in the dark. It's already
Hmm.
ready to go for them. You know what I mean? So those are all things that we have to. It goes back to planning, being smart about, training it, but also being smart on what we know we can actually do.
Yeah.
It's just like intubation. Like, we haven't trained on intubation. iGel or King LT may be something you might want to think about instead, versus trying to intubate if you haven't done it in a year.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm honest with myself on that.
Hmm. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I mean, I feel like I could talk to you forever because there's so many different trends that are coming above. Like, I want to know your thoughts on the whole blood program, and but I'm gonna have to get you back again because so that I don't, so that it's not a mini series podcast. But yeah, I'm hearing so many different things, but I guess a takeaway that I think that each of the people that I think listen, I don't personally know everybody who listens to our show, but I know that the people that I've interviewed and talked with, one thing has come in mind of what would differentiate really experience versus novice, of the medics, the PAs, the corpsmen, whoever that I'm working with these days, paramedics and things in EMS, pre-hospital and civilian world. Um, what one thing I see that comes in common is that you really do want to prepare for that mission so that when it happens, you've got your muscle memory, you're ready to roll, and you're not shaking to death. That you're. And one person was once telling me that I've always heard about the importance of stress inoculation and how we should make all this stuff happen and make things break and make all of this. And a medic recently said to me, I kind of think that's true, but we already did that in all the mystics. They made all the noise, they did all this stuff. He said, but I've never had silence. And they talked about how uncomfortable silence might be when you're
Yeah.
being evaluated and treating the patient. So gosh, I feel like there's so many more things that we could talk about. And I kind of want to get on a panel or something for us to keep unfolding these, because I think right now what we're learning, and those of us that are like actively trying to grow into, is that we're watching that conflicts have become different. And the introduction of the drone is
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine how different it's on the ground
Yeah.
because of the drone.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to learn. I'd love to talk to you more about that. But in the meantime, I guess we'll have to somehow cut it pretty soon. So moving forward, you think that when you're working with upcoming students, or you think about people that say, "Hey, I want to enlist, or I want to join." Do you have any regrets of doing military, starting with military medicine? Do you have any regrets, or
Oh no,
would you
no.
encourage? Yeah.
I think that no. So for me, I always tell anybody that joined. Like I just recently was with a group of divers in Hawaii, and the youngest diver he dove with me was 20 years old, and I
Uh,
just let him know like if you join the military for 4 years or you join the military for 25 years, when you get out, you're a veteran. You served your country, which is something bigger than yourself. You know, it's
yeah.
in America today. Maybe not always consider like what am I serving that's bigger than me, right? But also with that, you get this amazing training. You get a friendship of some of the best brothers and sisters you're ever going to have in your life. You got
Mhm.
to make a difference. And if you do decide to make a career out of it, the military has so many opportunities. I mean, I joined at 19 with 0 degrees, and I deployed and I gave service, but I have a bachelor's, master's, and a doctorate, all paid for
Wow.
by the military, and also all these crazy, amazing experiences from deploying to Iraq to to working at the White House to working just recently overseas in Europe, and I wouldn't trade any of that. And it also gave great experiences for my family too. My kids have kind of got to adapt and work everywhere. So I tell everybody I encourage people to join. When you join, also be humble, be trainable. Take it all in, enjoy the experience. That's always a key too, because military will, as long as you're willing to work hard, the military will take you to like crazy places if you let it happen.
Yeah. So tell me about that last hurrah that you had
Oh
with some
gosh.
Army divers, and then
Oh man.
and then I will thank you for your time and let you and our listeners go.
Oh, it was one of those things where I talk to my wife. We want to have like a big party or ceremony. I'm not huge on ceremonies. They're okay, but it was like, hey, why don't we take a trip to Hawaii? It'd be a fun vacation. And I called one of my old buddies. I was his instructor when he was in dive school,
Oh,
and
cool.
he's a master diver of the unit now. He's the first sergeant, and I was like, hey, what are the possibilities of doing a dive this week with you guys? I'd love to just come out, put on the hard hat, dive with the divers, and just enjoy some camaraderie. And he's like, brother, for you, I would definitely put you in a hat. Let's do it. So yeah, I got here out to Hawaii, and it was just last Thursday. I met up with the team, and we brought pizza on the dive side. We had lunch with them, and my
Oh,
my my daughter and my son got to meet all the divers, and we took some pictures in my dress uniform, and I got to dive with the youngest guy on the dive team. He was 20 years old, and then one of the supervisors, and yeah, I haven't worn that hard hat dive. I haven't done that in about 15 years, so it was a little bit like when I put it on, I was like, oh man, okay. But yeah, I got in and we opened up the flag underwater and we took pictures with it, and I was just telling them stories about my diving days, and they were sharing stories about the new diving days, and came back up. My kids actually jumped in the water and they're swimming above where I'm diving,
that is
and
so cool.
they yeah, we got up on surface, and it's cool because when I took off the hat, one thing we say in the dive field is we'll say "Hoo-yah deep sea," or if like when the flag goes down, we'll say "Hoo-yah America," and then everybody yells it, and they were like "Hoo-yah Major Kaufman," and my kids
Oh,
got to hoo-yah their dad, and it was just a surreal experience because I kind of felt like I got to leave the military as I came in, in the hard hat diving with just some of the best Americans, best individuals you could ever meet, but also show my family like this is what dad did, and just be proud of yourselves too as a military family, because we can't do this without our military families,
Yeah.
and so it was just a great experience all around for us all to celebrate. It was very intimate, but doing something that's just so exciting for all of us,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a great experience, and it was awesome to take the American flag underwater. I'll probably go hang it up on the wall back behind me.
Yeah.
It's a great experience, and that flag, that's actually a flag that I've carried with me. Um, Pretty much anywhere I travel, I carry it in my backpack. So
Oh,
it's
that's
been with me
awesome.
everywhere.
It's been
And
everywhere.
yeah, yeah, it's just been kind of
Wow.
something I started, I don't know, years ago. I think one of my buddies told me he did it. So I carried that, and I carried the unit flag over these last 3 years. So
Oh
just
my
a good
gosh.
kind of a good keepsake we could pass to the family maybe.
Yeah, that is amazing. I swear you. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to thank everybody on all of our listeners that we could hear Major Kaufman tell us his stories and just really have an inspirational podcast moment. So, Travis, thank you. Thank you to all the listeners for Splints and Whiskey. We will be back next week with a new episode. And if you want to learn a whole bunch and get to know Travis, feel free to follow him on his social media because he's always putting out some really, really great stuff. So thank you again.